have been on a spiritual and a metaphysical journey here at the Deep End, and we keep reapproaching stuff, reiterating things, trying to look at stuff, and it all gets back to why anything at all. But once we have stuff, once it evolves from being to life, from life to self-awareness to where we are now, you have to say, how did this thing come together? It's said that the human species is about 500,000 years old. Yet we humans did not evolve alone. We came to who we are in families. And we needed each other, not just to survive, but to thrive. One of the most vulnerable creatures in prehistorical life was a pregnant biped. And as we evolved and lost our hairy bodies, our young could no longer cling to their mothers, so our mothers had to now cling onto their young. And they had to cling for a long time. We ended up organizing ourselves in these family units. And this family unit was well on its way, even before we became human. There were family units. You can go to, other species, from chimpanzees to just about every other animal. Foxes, raccoons, deers, they all have families in some way, shape, or form. And the family became the central unit of growth, the garden that grows us into who we are today, as well as the anthropologists study families and family structures because they offer this great insight into the basis for our social structures, where we learn behaviors, where we learn values and beliefs that not only for us, but for our identities and also for the social and society's identities. In short, to look at the basic building blocks of human nature, of biological evolution, of cultural norms and differences, the family is the place to look. Now, the family used to be the mom, dad, kids, and maybe grandparents, the extended family. Today, the family is changing, and you could really trace that back to the 1950s and 60s, where more diverse ways of looking at the family and a family itself emerged. Before World War II, the extended family was pretty much what it was. But after World War II, the extended family began to fray. Kids grew up and they moved out. Since then, just in the last 25 years, childbearing among single parents has increased. Dissolution of cohabitating unions has decreased. Divorce, repartnering, remarriage, now gay marriage, and more diverse ways of seeing our sexual identities. All of that has come together. I know when we used to visit my dad's family in Kingston, New York, the extended family was still in their homestead, if you will, for the simple reason that a couple of the families were still living in the house with my grandparents, and a couple of the kids had moved out. The kids who moved out, by the way, either got married and moved out, or the two guys, my dad and his brother, they both served in the Second World War, and when they came back, they got their own place. The family is not what it used to be. We have our nuclear families now, our extended families, and now our intended families, which more people are seeing as their unit of growth. And that's made up of close friends, circle of social contacts, this whole thing. As a pastor, I did have the opportunity to have my kids raised not just by me and my wife, but by a whole community, which many of whom became part of my intended family. Yet, no matter how many diverse ways that we might see it, the family is still the primary soil in which we are grown, no matter how that family is defined. In a way, I learned to see family while I was interning at a mental hospital was family as system. Family systems. Now, here at the deep end, we've talked about the oneness of all things, and families. We can look at the nature of oneness by looking into a family. Think about this. Families are one, a single system full of all this love, understandings, beliefs, values, and tension. Now, I don't think any person is really sick within a system. Within family system, there's what's called the identified patient. Think about it as like maybe a plumbing system, and there's one joint in the plumbing that's weak, and so it starts leaking there. It's not just that joint's problem, it's the whole system's problem. And that's how family systems seek to look at families. And I will say it's been very helpful for me in my own bringing up my own family to see that we are one. That I have to admit, when my son became an adolescent, his testosterone spikes were ungodly. Trouble in River City. One of the issues we had with him was slamming doors. He'd get angry and slam doors. And I said, you slam that door one more time, you're going to lose it. He goes, oh, yeah, and he slams the door. I go get my screwdriver, and I take the door off, and then I put up I didn't put up anything. He put up a sheet. And I said, well, slam that sucker. See, it wasn't just Josh's problem. It was our problem. Adolescence happens to everybody. Every family has to endure these pieces. So what did we do? Edie and I went to therapy, and Josh went to therapy. And I'll tell you what, it changed everything, because we saw this not as Josh's problem, but as a family problem. And that was very helpful in my mind, in my universe, because we began to see that we fed into each other, and that was important. Now, a guy named Murray Bowen came up with this whole thing of family systems, very different than a Freudian or a Jungian or any of these others, because it allows us to see that our individual problems can only be solved within the context of family. And if the family's not being honest about stuff, then that identified patient really has no hope but to continue on their path of dysfunction, or whatever you want to call it. So the family becomes, in a very real way, an emotional unit, a single emotional unit. And changes in one person leads to the changes in the group. Unaddressed issues compound in the identified patient, and it just goes on and on. And I'll be honest, some of the system stuff that we addressed when I was an intern at St. Elizabeth's Mental Hospital seemed a little bit far-fetched. They talked about some families are cancer families, and the system can be addressed that way. Some are heart problems. And it seems to me that was a little far-fetched. But what I do know from reading studies and my own understanding of pastoral work for 50 years in the church, family treatment, these conflicts can address substance abuse, alcohol abuse, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorders, personality disorders, eating disorders, coping with physical disabilities, and in terms of real mental illness, such as schizophrenia and psychosis and things like that. Oh my gosh. To begin to see that within a family system, it might not cure the schizophrenia, but it will make the treatment of it a lot more above board and honest. So, I tell everybody, get a therapist, man. If you haven't, do it, because it's amazing. Bowen built this whole system to create some understandings, a differentiation of self, to understand triangles. That's where two people and one people are in a power system, to understand the emotional processes of the nuclear family, to understand the family projection process. I know families that going to a therapist has a stigma to it, so they won't do it. There's a whole projection thing that's going on, and parents end up displacing their own feelings and anxieties onto their children by not dealing with stuff, if you will. There's multi-generational transmission processes. I mean, we're think of what we're giving our kids in growing them in the garden of us. It also helps with sibling position. Birth order can definitely affect the dynamics between children and siblings and parents. There's a whole series of things that can be addressed in a systems way that are not very fruitful when you're just putting it on one person. So families. Family as an emotional unit, as a garden, if you will, to grow the next generation of human beings. Kids are not born human, I don't think. They're born with the potential to be human, and we grow that in them or we don't. And how we do that and how we give them the resources to address those things that we cannot address or are unable to address, I think that is everything in the world, giving them tools as well as a foundation. So I just threw out a whole lot. I want to kind of hang with family systems just because I think it's a good way of understanding us as individuals, but also it's in keeping with our theme of the oneness. I think the family is the first field in which we experience the oneness of it. And what we're experiencing is the emotional nature of the family and how we appropriate that. So I'm here with my cohorts, Bob Hayes coming to us from Florida, Mary Ann Rudis coming to us from Spokane Valley. I am Red Hawk, and I'm coming from Spokane. Mary Ann, I'll turn it to you first. What do you think of this whole idea of family systems?
Well, I think it's a lovely idea, and I think there's merit to it, and I think that it's interesting that that is the place where we learn about the world, we learn about life, whatever family it is that we end up in, and I think people within a family do take on different roles, and they take on different, and it's interesting how that evolves. And yes, those roles are going to be dependent on what the other people are doing. So it is this interconnected system. And I think that if we can understand that, we understand the role that we took on, that may or may not be something we want to continue for the rest of our lives, which is where therapy comes in, that when we can look at that and understand it, we can start to be more intentional. I remember vividly, distinctly, the day that I realized that not everyone was raised the same way that I was, that not everyone had the same experiences of childhood, of family that I had. And that accounts for this wide variety of who we are in the world and how we interact with others, with strangers, with new people, with all these things that happen in our lives. So, yeah, I think it's critical for us to examine those relationships, what they taught us. And some of them, I think you mentioned love. Some of them taught some really horrible lessons that had nothing to do with love. And so what do you do with those kind of things? And again, I think that's where examining where we came from, examining those relationships, and seeking third-party input is not a bad idea.
Amen. Bob, what say you on this front?
Well, you know, when you use the word system, you already hooked me. Uh, uh, you know, it's really very interesting because just as every individual is unique, every family is unique. Even though every family is a system, that unique family system is different across different families. Now, Marianne, you just mentioned the roles that each family member plays, and it's an interesting dynamic there. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, you know. Do you take on a role, or does your family place you in a role? And do you agree to stay in that role, or does your family lock you into that role? And does that role change over time? And all of these different things are happening. But like any other system, the family is going to modify itself to maintain its status as a family system. Now, that may be dysfunctional, that may be very functional, or anywhere in between. But the fact of the matter is, like any other system, when one part of that system changes, it's going to change everything else within the system. And it's very difficult if one person wants to step outside of the role that they're in the family is going to adjust itself to try and maintain that same equilibrium there. And that's why therapists or outside, someone you can talk to outside of the family can be a very important thing, because they can point out these different dynamics that are going on that you don't necessarily see when you're within the middle of them. But the fact of the matter is, the family is shaping what we are as individuals. And hopefully there's enough interaction and shifting of power dynamics and love dynamics and all of those things, that each individual within the family can find their place and become comfortable in it. And I think that's what we all hope is happening in our families, even though it doesn't necessarily happen all the time.
Yeah.
But I think an important thing to remember is that a family is dynamic and it's going to change over time. But at the same time it's changing, there are forces within the family that are going to try and maintain the status quo.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. When Josh was writ large in terms of his adolescent and very loud, I asked a therapist, you know, why is he doing this like this? And she was very clear. She said that Edie and I have very big selves. We're out in the community. We're doing all this stuff. So what's a kid got to do to differentiate himself from that? A lot bigger. You know, to cut the cord, it's going to be a lot bigger thing. And it was like, yeah. And, you know, just what you said, Bob, we tried to find stability in the midst of that, and yet at the same time give Josh the tools to become who he is, and who he's still becoming. And to know that there is, you know, the tool thing is so helpful to me, to know that in all my failings, at least I gave the kids the tools to deal with those parts of themselves that are a product of my failings, if that makes sense.
There's great freedom there.
Well, you know, I know I wasn't always the best dad because I was doing my own stuff, and it was, again, pretty big, you know, bands, and not just bands, but organizations I was part of, and being in the community. So it made sense to me that that to differentiate, sometimes there needs to be a bigger knife involved to cut the cord. And not. I had a colleague, and when her kids hit 21, she would send them a package with her apron strings in them. And one of her kids sent them back and said, "Could you just keep these for a couple more years?"
I love it.
And it's that gentleness. It's being honest. When Josh calmed down, we could have an honest conversation about why I took his door down and how upsetting to the family he was. And of course, after some therapy, he got it. He didn't stop being adolescent. He started expressing it in different ways. My guitarist today and Josh is my drummer. When they were young, Josh says, "Hey, Dad, can I borrow your video camera?" They were doing these chronicles, which was kind of like Jackass for their friends, doing stupid stuff. So they go over to the big box store, Shopko here, and two of them take off their overcoats, and they're in wrestling gear, and they do a wrestling match in the middle of this huge store. And the last thing that is videoed is the manager of the store pointing to Josh, who's shooting the video, saying, "I want that camera." Well, when Josh asked for my camera a week later, I said, "Not a chance. You can't borrow my camera. You get your own camera," which he did. And they continued to shoot the chronicles. And I always say, "Bob, you and I did a bunch of stupid stuff, but we didn't video it." The family has changed.
There's no evidence.
Yeah, and I want to say that the internet, I have to imagine, is changing the family in ways that I don't always get. I see it in my grandson some, just because he wants to go on and play video games and stuff. But it's a very different way. My grandson will say, Ethan, who's his cousin, "Ethan is mean to me." And I said, "Well, why do you think he's mean to you?" He says, "I think he's mean because his dad's mean to him." Now, my grandson's 5 years old. I'm going, damn, that's pretty insightful. And to see those connections, the way they get passed down and passed over to other people, friends and family, I think that's part of a family awareness today that I know my family growing up did not have, if that makes sense.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that example is perfect of, we learn from our family unit how to treat others and how to be in the world. And we take that on. And I think, when you were talking about the internet and how it's changing the family, it's unbelievable. I mean, there's a whole generation growing up with their lives out there on the internet, and they had no say about that. And I know some kids that got older, especially sick kids, because that was my world for a long time, being around kids that were going through cancer treatments, and their parents putting all of these photos out on the internet. And then as they got older, they were like, I don't want that out there. I don't want it to be there. So there's a whole other way of, the internet is creating brand new issues.
Yeah. And we always get back to health and wholeness, don't we?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I want to emphasize a couple of points that you just made that I thought were really good. And one of them is the word gentle. And the idea behind that is, we're going to have these different things going on in our families. And there's a couple of ways we can handle them. We can go in there with a hammer and we can just, bash everybody upside the head and get into shape and do what you're supposed to. Or we can be gentle about it. We can try and understand where they're coming from, how we as a family, we as a father or a mother, have put them in a position like that. And again, that's where, a therapist can maybe help us point out those kind of things. And I think we can all do a lot better if we can remember that word, gentle. Let's be a little bit more gentle in the way we handle each other. Yeah.
Although I have to say, in one therapy session, Edie and I were in, I said I was ready to deck him. I was this close, and Edie stopped me. And I thought the therapist was going to say, "Why did you want to deck him?" But the therapist said to Edie, "Why did you stop him?" I'm glad she did, by the way. At the time, I wasn't. The whole concept of family is changing so radically right now, and it's frightening. There's a whole, half the backlash we're seeing in this country is due to the changing family. Whether it's a woman's choice to have an abortion or not, whether it's a child that who no longer identifies with the sex they were born with, all these different things. I have friends, gay families, where they have kids, and watching them bring them up, has been a delight, and also a way of watching an American experiment, because I think we're trying stuff out that we want to give opportunity to, because you don't need a man and a woman to raise a family. Again, there are more single parents today than ever before. I go and every day I look at the paper of people getting married and dissolutions, and the list of dissolutions is growing, and the list of marriages is getting smaller. It's kind of an interesting event to be a part of in this life, and yet at the same time know how important this garden that we are, this soil that we're offering to new human beings, to grow them into truly whole and healthy human beings. It's not easy by any means. Today, just a short look at the family. I want our listeners, give yourself a break. At the same time, know that your own emotional situation, your own spiritual situation probably has its roots in your family. And how we approach the world in some way also has its roots in the family. So I can't believe we're coming to the end of our time already, but we are. So, Bob, final comments?
Okay, real quick, we didn't really have time to touch much on the intentional family. And I think that that's very important, because when we make friends and choose a group to associate with and so forth, that can change not only our internal family dynamic, because we're bringing in other points of view, but can change our individual point of view by seeing how other families work. And I could list a bunch of families that you would resonate with, that we had contact with growing up. And it's very important to see these different points of view and see how different families work and how that might improve your own situation.
Amen. Final comments, Marianne?
Yeah, I think, what I take away from this whole conversation is just one big question: what is family? And I think it's many, many things. And you're right. I think there are chosen families, and then there's biological families. There are also pseudo families. I mean, sometimes you go into a workplace and we're all family. Well, that may or may not be true. Unless you define family as interconnected systems. And so then it is, all of these different groups that we're in are a sort of family, especially if they're something that we do on an ongoing basis. And I just always go back to don't let fear rule your interactions, and figure out who you are and be that.
Amen. And that's not easy to do. I might suggest that that's a great segue for our next podcast, which is going to be a couple weeks out because I'm going to do some traveling. But the whole concept of revolution, turning it over, becoming someone new. I know in my life there were some revolutions, but also for the last 500 years, revolution has been the way. It's just amazing how human beings can turn things over. And how did we get from the word revolution to revolution as a fighting word. Where did all this come from? Did it start with the French Revolution, which was a totally failed thing? What really happened? Did the American Revolution, was that really a revolution, or was it something else? Was it just a change of economic hands? All this, we're going to try to address it, at least I am. I'm reading Fareed Zakaria's Revolution right now, and I'm hoping to come with some insight as to the human family. I think that right now, the whole planet is in the midst of a revolution on so many fronts. What can we do? How can we facilitate it to the point where more health and wholeness is the outcome? My friends, this is Red Hawk coming to you from the deep end, and in all things, may you find peace and offer yourself as a blessing.